Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, babbling about psychology and theology. Alright, let's talk about Lil Nas X. I never even heard of him until his recent stunt with his music video, Montero, and his Satan shoes that caused a big stir. And I had no interest in watching his music video, but then Jonathan Pageau did a symbolic analysis of both his video and the show WandaVision, and how they related to the meaning of Satanism. And to make things even more ominous, when Jonathan tried to record his video, his recording software was mysteriously not working. The recording was blank, and that happened twice. It sure seemed like some devils were trying to stop him from making this video. So it sounded very important, so now I got pretty interested in what he had to say about this. Now, instead of making a video, he opted to share his manuscript to Rod Dreher, who then posted it on his website, The American Conservative. And I read it, and I found his analysis insightful as always. And then later on, he was able to finally make his video. Now, his analysis was on the bigger picture of how Satanism is all about pride. And there were several things he said that fit perfectly with what I've been learning from Theology of the Body, and what I said in my video about the satanic conspiracy of the sexual revolution. So for this video, whereas Jonathan does a perfect job revealing the meaning of Satanism, I want to zoom in a bit more on the homosexuality being celebrated in Lil Nas X's song and video. When we see how homosexuality relates to the satanic pride that Jonathan is talking about, we will see how Lil Nas X's song is actually the perfect anthem for gay pride. And perfect timing too, with June, the so-called Gay Pride Month, being just around the corner. But first, because Jonathan does such an excellent job describing the music video, I'm going to borrow some from Jonathan's commentary before I add my own. So let's just watch Jonathan explain the basics of this video.
So the Montero video is a rather disturbing sight to behold. In a world inhabited only by virgins of himself, Lil Nas X sings about his intimate encounter, let's call him, and his obsession with a man who has the same name as him, Montero. And Call Me By Your Name is the unofficial title of the song. The video ultimately is about one thing. It's about pride. This self-love is represented as an exploration of the strangeness and idiosyncrasies of oneself, self-seduction, self-victimizing, self-abasement, self-gratification, and ultimately self-crowning. In speaking to his self-named lover, Montero tells us that I'm not fazed, only here to sin. If Eve ain't in your garden, you know that you can. And so pride as self-love appears ultimately as a sterile revolution against the natural patterns of the world. A desire for the world to be solipsistic, to be contained by myself, for the world to be in my image, and a desire to be free from the usual constraints of natural patterns and cycles of being. He tells his self-named lover that he wants to, let's say, I won't quote it exactly, but let's say to put a child in his mouth. And this is, of course, the ultimate image of sterility, of solipsistic dreaming, of this imagination which is taken up in fantastical places but does not produce body, community, or cohesion, but only causes revolution, fragmentation, and ultimately loneliness. Montero tells us that what he wants to do to the ones he envies. And we have entered the pattern of revolution, of attempting to come up, then come in from behind. So we find Montero under the tree of knowledge in the primordial garden, where he's first frightened, but then seduced by a serpent figure. So in the video, after his seduction by the serpent, it follows Montero to a kind of Colosseum where he's chained and judged by cross-dressed virgins of himself. He's then stoned by these dusty zombie figures that are replicas of him, and then he's finally killed with some disturbing sex toy. So, yeah. He ascends into the sky to meet a shadowy angel, but this pole, this pole/lance shoots up from below. And as Montero grabs it, he begins to slide down in the guise of a pole dancer into the belly of hell. And let's be honest, if there was ever a perfect representation of the, let's call it, ontological reality of pole dancing, I'm pretty sure this is it. The pole coming up from below is, of course, an inversion of the spear of St. Michael, which is portrayed in medieval imagery as pinning down the great serpent that is Satan coming from above. But now this spear/pole is coming to claim Montero from behind, with all the undertones that also includes. So even though it's coming from below, it's nonetheless this axis mundi, the axis of the world. It nonetheless is this hierarchy which connects heaven and earth together, though now it's not a hierarchy seen from the side of the traditional, let's say, ladder that you see in icons of the ladder of divine ascent, which is going up in humility and worship and self-transformation, but rather it's this coming up from behind of revolution. And this type of coming up from behind doesn't end up being going up in the end. It just actually ends up being a coming down, being chased from heaven, which is what you see in the story of the red dragon in Revelation that uses its tail to knock down the stars from the sky. And then he ends up falling down onto the earth and to the sea. And so it's not the axis from the point of view of the ladder, but it's something like this hierarchy from the point of view of the chute or of the serpent sliding down, just like in a chutes and ladders game. So Montero is actually replaying the first part of the video here, this part where he was seduced by the serpent, which was sliding down the tree, but now he is the serpent who will slide down in order to seduce Satan himself. So ending up in a caricature of hell with the thorn-covered door, which is a nice touch in terms of symbolism, Montero lap dances Satan into this simulated sexual act to then himself come up behind the evil one to break his neck, to steal his horns and his crown, replacing the devil in what we could call a final revolution, a revolution which is the supremacy of the self. In the Montero video, Lil Nas X gets it right. Satanic imagery has never ultimately been about worshiping the devil, but rather about embodying the revolutionary pattern through the type of pride exemplified by Satan in his war against heaven, and which ends with self-worship and self-crowning. And obviously it can't really end that way, for Montero's only claim to the crown of horns is violence and revolution, which means that there is always another pole-riding, lap-dancing, person in line waiting to kill Montero and to take the crown from him. But let's just say that that's another story as well. In Montero's hell, we see this engraving in flaming letters. We see the famous Latin phrase, "Amnant quod non intelligent," which means they condemn that they do not understand. And what is wanted through these narrative tropes is ultimately the opposite of that. Something like the misunderstood will condemn them. Something like the exception will invalidate the rule. So if in the Christian vision, the shepherd is willing to leave the flock, to even leave it unprotected, to go out and find one lost sheep, here we rather have this lost sheep demanding that the shepherd not bring the sheep back to the flock, but rather bring the entire flock out into the wilderness. So if in traditional societies we see this scapegoat mechanism of sacrificing the exception in order to preserve coherence, here it is the opposite of that. It is a desire to sacrifice the entire world for the exception. On a social level, this is what appears as upside down hierarchies, where the strange, the impure, the exceptional, the fluid, the rejected, the sick, and the unknown become not those we need to help, but they become a new measure by which all of society is evaluated. It's important to be aware of what is happening so as to not be duped by Antichrist, as Christ warned us. But underneath all the scandal, all the sacrilege and reversals, there's actually a secret story happening through all of this, and I've hinted at it in my video already. Watching someone like Lil Nas X mocks, deride, and invert our stories to the cheers of the media and the cultural gatekeepers, we must remember that Christ chose Judas, who would betray him from within his inner circle. In the same manner, our current situation is part of the story. And the satanic imagery, for all its arrogance and pride, exposes in plain view the underbelly of modern secularism. And though this imagery appears as a manifestation of where Christians have failed, it is nonetheless a restating of the Christian story through attention to its opposite. An upside-down world, a solipsistic, sterile, and artificial world must inevitably flip back. The glorification, even in spiteful jest, of satanic tropes of rebellion reminds us that it is only the crucified one and the story of self-sacrifice which breaks those unending revolutions.
Let's start with the fact that the music video is in a world inhabited by replicas of himself. This showcases the nature of homosexuality, of same-sex eroticization. As Christians, we believe that same-sex behavior and relationships are sinful. But sadly, too many believers have a very surface-level understanding as to why it's a sin, primarily just pointing to the several passages that directly condemn homosexual practice. But when we look only for such clobber passages, we're reinforcing a type of ignorance about sin. Sin means to miss the mark of God's design and intent. In Hebrew, the word is hata'ach. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But the word means to fall off the right path. And in Greek, the word is hamartia, which means to miss the target, as in archery. So when you understand the meaning of sin, things become much clearer. When we just look for clobber passages, our human tendency is to seek out the loophole. Okay, it says, man shall not lie with a man as he lies with a woman, but that seems to be in context of idolatry in the Old Testament, so it must only have to do with like temple prostitutes and worshiping pagan gods. So as long as I'm not doing those things, then I can engage in homosexual relationships with my committed monogamous partner. See, we're looking for these loopholes when we don't understand the meaning of sexuality. This is what Jesus encountered and corrected in the Sermon on the Mount. The Jews were just looking at the letter of the law, what was actually written, what was stated explicitly. And so he had to remind them of the spirit of the law. How many times he says in the Sermon on the Mount, you have heard it said, and then he quotes the scripture, the law. But I tell you, and he's not telling them anything contradictory to God's law. In fact, he makes that very clear. I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And so what he means is that he's showing them what the meaning of it is. That you're missing it out. You're just looking at the explicit laws. You're trying to find loopholes, but you're missing what the meaning of it is, what the purpose is. So how do you know what is sin? If sin is missing the mark of God's design and intent, then if you learn what God's design and intent is for something, like our sexuality, then you don't really need clobber passages to determine what sexual sin is. In Theology of the Body and studying the symbolic nature of the sexual difference, we reflect on the overarching narrative of Scripture and the different passages in Genesis, Jesus' own words in the Gospels, and Ephesians 5, which talks about the great mystery of how the marriage of man and woman relates to Christ and the church. And what we learn is that God intentionally designed us to be different sexually as part of being made in His image. As it says in Genesis, we are made in the image of God, male and female He made us. So the maleness and femaleness is integral to the image of God. This reflects the complementarian nature in himself as a trinity. He is a unity in diversity. Different persons, but enough sameness that they can unite. And with him making us male and female, and then calling us to one flesh unions, marriage, he's showing us that our bodies are symbols, or icons, which are windows into our destiny to unite with him as the bride of Christ. So, our sexuality is the greatest icon of who God is, who we are, and the fact that he wants to marry us, as Christopher West so often says. So our sexuality is on the mark. It has integrity insofar as it accurately images this. And that is ultimately what makes homosexual desires disordered and homosexual practice a sin. It misses the mark of God's design and intent to image his own self-giving, complementarian nature, and our call to participate in that nature. It lacks the symbolic integrity of the male-female union. For there to be a union, there must be diversity, a type of complementarity that fits the other. But what we see in homosexuality, and demonstrated so profoundly in Lil Nas X's video, is too much sameness. There's no true complementarity. Sure, partners can have different personalities, but in their bodies, which is where sexuality really matters, they are alike. Two men cannot fit together in a way that makes sense, in a way that produces life, in a way that fits what our genitalia are meant to do. The one partner does not have what the other partner needs in order to create a true one flesh union and create new life, which is what's the purpose of sex? Like, at least biologically speaking, is to procreate, is to participate in God's creative actions. So it's sterile at best, and it brings death at worst. As a consequence of the sameness, a gay union cannot produce life. Instead, it produces more self-idolatry. This is true of any sexual practice, not just homosexuality, any sexual practice that deviates from God's design. As Christopher West explains,
all the pleasures and good things God created, which is everything, because God looked at everything he made and said, behold, it is very good. All the pleasures of this world are so many little icons that are meant to point me to heaven. But when I direct my desire for heaven towards the icon of heaven, the icon becomes an idol. An idol. It's a God substitute. But behind every God substitute is the desire for the real God that's gotten misdirected. Are you following me?
So you see, when we place all our value in the icon, our sexuality, our very humanness, instead of what the icon is meant to be a window to, God himself, then the icon becomes an idol. We idolize sexuality, and then in turn we idolize self. Therefore, it's no accident that celebration of homosexuality, gender identity, and all other sexual deviancies is called pride. Heck, they've become synonymous. The activists don't even call it gay pride or even LGBT pride anymore. They just say pride. And that is exactly right. And that's why Lil Nas X's song is the perfect gay pride anthem. It's all about worship of self. Yes, there is a satanic agenda behind the gay pride movement and the sexual revolution in general. But even if we just look at it psychologically, we see that the gay link to pride runs strong. It's well known, but not often talked about, that there is a high correlation between homosexuality, male homosexuality in particular, and narcissism. We get the term narcissism from the myth of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection. On the surface, that's what's happening in the song and in the music video. He is fixated on this guy who looks like him and shares his name, Montero. Interesting side note, the subtitle of the song is Call Me By Your Name, which is also the name of the 2017 gay pederast film starring Armie Hammer as a 24-year-old grad student falling in love with, or grooming rather, his professor's 17-year-old son. Anyway, back to Lil Nas X and gay narcissism. It may seem like he's really in love with himself, but in narcissism, the pride, that self-love, is an illusion, a veneer. You see, when you turn an icon into an idol, whether that idol is yourself or someone else, your sexuality, sex itself, you will ultimately realize that it cannot give you what you really want. The narcissist is craving the acceptance, affirmation, affection, and admiration, the 4 A's, that he needed but did not receive in childhood. In homosexuality, the desire for admiration is particularly regarding his gender identity and masculinity, meaning that in some way in childhood, his masculinity was not affirmed. He didn't feel like he belonged in the world of men. He wasn't fully accepted by the men in his life that he looked up to, whether they were peers or his dad or his brothers, other father figures or male role models. He did not feel like he measured up and was worthy to be counted among them. For various reasons, that could be. Now, there are some lines in verse 2 of the Montero song that exemplify this and get at the heart of same-sex eroticization. He says, "A sign of the times every time that I speak. A dime and a nine, it was mine every week. What a time, an incline, God was shining on me." Notice the self-aggrandizement there. It's just this elevation of self. A sign of the times every time I speak. And God was shining on me. It's ironic too, because then he's going to do everything in this music video to defy God. But he's basking in God shining on him. Then he says, "Now I can't leave." And this is the hook. The addiction of idolatry. When we try to satisfy our innate desire for the infinite in the finite icon, that's addiction. Because it gives us just a hint of satisfaction. Because God made all these things, all these pleasures in this life to be a taste of the infinite pleasure and beauty that we will experience at the marriage supper of the Lamb. So he's given us little foretastes of that destiny in this life, whether it's sex or food or a beautiful sunset, of spending time with friends and family. These are just moments of pleasure that are hints at the ultimate fulfillment in heaven or the new earth. So because it gives us just a hint of satisfaction, we go back for more until that wears off. And then we go back for more again and again and again. That's the addiction. I can't leave, he says. And now I'm acting hella elite. He's acting. It just shows, once again, the pride is a front. The self-aggrandizement is a front. It's a cover. Because really, deep down, there's shame. There's emptiness. There's hurt. There's woundedness. And there's a sense that he's really not his true self. May not him in particular I can really get into, but I can make a bet on that based on my experience with so many other guys with same-sex attraction. Then he says this, and this really kind of helps confirm what I'm talking about. I never want the N-words that's in my league. I want to F the ones I envy. I envy. That final line is particularly telling. Whether he realizes it or not, Lil Nas X just revealed what's at the heart of his same-sex attraction. He desires to possess in the other what he believes he's missing himself. Like there's this underlying belief that if I can sexually unite with this ideal guy, then I can absorb the masculinity he has that I'm missing. Notice this music video. All the guys are him, but yet there's someone that has his name that he desires, that he envies. So it's someone who matches my ideal self, and that's the one I desire. Matches the, in some way, he's closer to this idealization of who I wish I was. And so I desire to possess that person. This is what we see frequently in counseling for guys with unwanted same-sex attraction. The men they're attracted to in some way represent their own ideal selves. It's unconscious envy that becomes sexualized. They feel so distant from their authentic self, so alienated from their own gender, that they hopelessly desire to consume and incorporate a man that fits that desired self. It's what we view as exotic that becomes erotic. And what I mean by exotic, I mean foreign, different. So if you grew up feeling like you didn't measure up as a man, or wounded in your gender identity in some other way, then your own sex is the one you feel different from. And so when puberty comes, it's the sex you feel different from, foreign from. That's the one that becomes a mystery to you, and that you will then find most attractive. See, that's why it's important for boys to go through the cootie stage when it comes to girls, that they don't over-identify with girls in their younger years, so they get a sense that girls are different. And they need to bond with guys so they like get to that point where like, I now am confident that I'm a guy. And there's nothing else I can get from these guys. I have what I need from them, at least in general. So that when puberty comes and the sex hormones come in, I'm now aroused to seek out merging with the one that is different from me, the one I'm not used to, the one that's mysterious. That's what we mean when we say exotic becomes erotic. And that's what makes same-sex attraction narcissistic. It's driven by a desire to heal that gender wound. Now this next part might get me in trouble. Might get me canceled. You can also think of it as a cannibalistic drive. Now before you react to that idea, consider what cannibalism is really about, at least historically or anthropologically. Tribes that engaged in cannibalism weren't eating other humans because they just liked the taste of human meat. They did it because of a core belief that doing so would enable them to absorb the essence of the individual. There has to be something admirable in the one they are eating, even if it's just their basic life force, however they would view it. But there's something about them that I'm going to obtain and absorb into me by eating them. In Christianity, we symbolically consume the body and blood of Jesus because he is our highest ideal. We desire to unite with him and become like him. And so he gave up his body for us. And he tells us, my body is true food and my blood is true drink. Now it's still symbolic. We're not literally eating his body and blood. At least not all of us think that way. But either way, what we're saying is that as we incorporate, which means to put into our bodies, his symbolic body, we also symbolically become his body. That's why the church is called the body of Christ. So we are becoming like him. But in homosexuality, there's a perversion of this symbolism, of the Eucharist. It's this desire to consume the other is like a perversion of the Eucharist. And I'm not saying it's intentional on the part of the individual. It's unconscious. The man is looking to another fallen and broken, imperfect man to be his ideal and his completion. And if you struggle with this, I want you to know that my heart is not to condemn you at all. If you can relate to what I've been saying, I want you to know that you are seen. And God's heart is to heal those wounds that drive your sexual struggles. First, you must take off the mask of pride and narcissism. The path to healing starts with humility, and humility starts with honesty. Next, you need to get to the place of knowing with certainty that you are one of the guys. And this is not just a knowledge, like a cognitive knowledge, it's a felt knowledge. It's emotional, it's embodied knowledge. You need to know deep down that you are one of the guys. You belong in the world of men as an equal, as a fellow brother. And arriving at that confidence is difficult. It takes a community of men that will affirm your true identity, not the false self you've been portraying. And it takes wise counsel and help to heal the wounds and combat the lies about your identity and worth. So I pray that this video gives you something to reflect upon. I'm taking risks speaking so plainly about this stuff because I care. My greatest desire is for you to live in reality. It's something I tell my clients all the time. My job is to help you live in reality. And this refusal to accept reality, to accept the meaning of our bodies, and of our sexuality, is what drives the gay rights movement, the gay pride, LGBTQ plus pride movement. And this is exactly what Jonathan is talking about near the end of his video. That instead of accepting help for reintegrating and find healing for what marginalizes them, the individuals in this gay pride movement are instead trying to deconstruct the norms, to remove the meaning of our bodies, to obfuscate and just destroy the meaning itself, and instead promote a revolution, a replacement of values, a replacement of meanings. So in this revolution of the margin now becoming the center, and the center now becoming the margin, or at least adherence to the center now becoming marginalized, we're going to then have an occasion for the truth to become revolutionary. And in the final post-chorus of Montero, Lil Nas X sings, "Tell me you love me in private, call me by your name. I do not care if you lie." Well, you should care. You should care if someone is lying to you, if you're lying to someone else with your body, with your words. And you should care if the world is lying to you, if the message from the world, from the enemy, is telling you you're someone that God did not design you to be. Seek the truth. Seek God. Seek the truth of who God is, of who you are, and what God's design and intent is for you. Well, that's all for now. If you got something out of this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe. God bless.